How I Became a Ghost, a Choctaw Trail of Tears story by Tingle. Chapter 4, Fire in the Hair. We returned from the river. While Luke and Jumper and I played in the backyard, Mother cooked supper. Everybody was quiet while we ate. No one said anything about the old men and women at the river. No one said anything about treaty talk, but the silence spoke louder than words. Soon after supper, we went to bed. It happened after midnight. Felt no shiver. This was real. I smelled smoke and jumped out of the bed. The room was dark, but I could smell smoke. It was behind me. So I turned around. The smoke was still behind me. I turned around again. The smoke was still behind me. I turned around and around. I was scared now. Why couldn't I see the smoke? I wanted to scream. I felt the skin on the back of my neck burning. My long hair was in flames. I heard a loud crack and fire fell from the ceiling. I grabbed my blanket. I wrapped it around my shoulders, smothering the flames. When I opened the door, a cloud of fire hit me in the face. I ran through the flames and out the front door. My mother and father and Luke stood in the yard. Jumper was there too. He limped into my arms. "We thought you ran out back," my mother said. "We called for you. The smoke was so thick." The roof on our house was burning. Bright specks of fire floated into the night sky. "Run next door and wake the neighbors," my father said. "They can help us put the fire out." Luke and I ran to the neighbor's house, but it was burning too. We flung open the door and ran inside. Everybody was still sleeping. "Wake up!" Luke shouted. With squeals and screams, our neighbors jumped out of bed and fled their burning house. "Run to the church and ring the bell," said my father. "Wake everybody up!" Luke and I started for the church, but my father stopped us. "Wait! Look there!" He was pointing to the river. Men rode horses from the river. Nahyo men, and they carried burning torches. While we watched, they rode to the church. They leaped from their horses and threw the torches high, aiming for the house where the missionaries lived. We stood in the street watching, my family and our neighbors. The torches made slow circles, turning over and over, followed by a trail of sparks. Like fiery comets, 20 flaming torches fell from the sky. They landed on the roof of the house, and the dry cedar boards burst into flames. The missionaries were visiting another Choctaw town that week, but the Nahyos didn't know that. They would have burned the house down with the missionaries inside asleep. A Nahyo man ran into the church and climbed the ladder to the bell tower. He dropped his torch on the roof, and soon the church was swirling massive flames. What about the Bibles, I thought, and the songbooks? The men shouted and pointed to us. One man took his shotgun from his horse and aimed it at my family. My father threw himself over us, and we fell to the ground. "Pow!" The noise from the shot was loud. "Oh!" a neighbor shouted. My face was covered in blood, the blood of our next-door neighbor. His shoulder was bleeding. My father took off his shirt and wrapped it around him. "Run!" my father said, and we stayed together. We hurried to the deep woods at the end of town. The Nahyo men jumped on their horses and followed us. When we entered the woods, my father pushed us into a clump of bushes. We knelt and huddled close together. My father whispered in my ear, "Take a deep breath and do not move." I nodded and sucked in the cold night air. Jumper climbed under my shirt. My father put his hand behind my head, and I pushed my face to the ground. He did this to protect me. I lay with my face on the wet ground. A man rode his horse into the woods. He was so close. I could have reached out and touched the hoof of his horse. Even Jumper knew to be quiet. I felt him warm against my belly. "I don't see them," the man yelled. "Let them go," said another man. "They will wander around in the swamps till we find them. No place else for them to go. Their homes are burning." "We should have done this a long time ago," he whispered to himself, but we were close enough to hear him. We stayed in the bushes all night and watched the houses burn. The flames made a crackling sound, and by morning, every house had fallen to the ground. I learned something about houses that night. They will sound strange. On the night I almost became a ghost, I learned something about houses. Houses are alive. Every house shook before it fell. Like Jumper shaking water after a swim, every house shook. Every house shouted too. As loud as the thunder, every house also shouted. One by one, every house shouted and fell. I lay on the ground with my father, my mother, my brother Luke, and Jumper. Our neighbors crouched on the ground nearby. We watched our houses shout and shake and fall. I wonder if anyone burned in their houses, Luke said. The Jonahs, I told him. Mr. Jonah and Mrs. Jonah. How do you know that? Luke asked. I did not answer him. My mother looked at me. Of course, she knew. She knew everything. There's nothing we can do, my father said. We can stay together, said my mother.